You're listening to Help Me, I'm a Comedian, the show where we ask a comedian to come in and share an issue of pain from their life, while a psychologist tries to help them through. I'm Ashwin Segkar, and you're joined now by comedian Jenny Wynter and psychologist Dr Rachel Hannam. Jenny, can we start with your story?
It was grade 12, the end of high school, just about to finish, and I'd always been like really, really positive and happy at high school. I loved high school. I was a chronic overachiever, did really well, and we had this sort of little party gathering. And one of the funny things that they decided to do was do this sort of joke round of like singling out students and what they would be the most likely to end up doing in life. But it was a joke. So it was like the vegetarian of the grade. She was going to be a whale slayer. And, you know, somebody else who was like incredibly studious would end up cleaning toilets. You know, it was all just really silly kind of stuff. And they came around to me and they said, and Jenny's going to be a manic depressive. And I just at that moment thought, like, wow, like no one here knows me at all, because that was absolutely accurate.
Can you explain where that overachieving came from?
Yeah, so my mum died when I was 5, and it was very unexpected, very sudden, clearly very traumatic. And I've since read that a lot of kids that do lose their parents really young in life become chronic overachievers because it's a way of gaining some control. It's like, well, I couldn't control that in my life, but I can control like what I'm going to get out of it. And I think for me too, part of that impulse was being so aware that life can end at any second. Like from the age of 5, I knew this is finite. Anything could happen. I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. So my gosh, I've got to squeeze everything in. I don't want to have any regrets. I want to put in 100% all the time and never look back and think I could have done more. It just became it became my identity.
Jenny, can you take us back to that moment that your mum passed away? You were 5 years old.
Yes.
Can you describe what you went through at the time it happened?
Well, it's so funny, isn't it, the way that your mind works? Because I remember as a little kid, I honestly was perplexed why people were freaking out about her being unwell, because I remember lying there with her on the bed. She said she wasn't well, but I thought she just had a headache. So yeah, I was just, all of her friends came over and they were all like, we've got to take you to hospital. And she was like, no, like, I don't want to go. And I just thought, why are you doing this? And they did take her. And then I didn't see her for a month because she was in intensive care. She'd had an aneurysm. So it's, blood vessel burst in her brain, and they were trying to operate, but they couldn't because her brain kept going into spasm. But of course, all I knew was that the hospital wasn't letting me see her. We weren't allowed to go into the intensive care unit. So, yeah, it was just this, felt like an eternity. A month to a 5-year-old is just forever. And then, of course, then she died. And it was just, my memory of being told that is that it was in the middle of the night. There was a phone call and I went up to my uncle's bedroom because we were staying with my grandma and my uncle. And my memory of him telling me is I'm out of my body. It's like I'm looking down on that happening and then kind of floating up to the ceiling. And that memory is completely inaccurate because apparently it was in the afternoon. My grandma and uncle had already been told, and they'd taken my little sister and I out to see a ballet that afternoon because they just wanted us to have one last, nice experience before all this stuff, tragic stuff came crashing around us. Yeah, so my memory is not accurate. So it's really interesting how I can't even remember what he said to me, but my picture is us just sitting on the bed and just crying. That's the only moment of my life that I think I have been that dissociated. And I try to go back to it because I've actually got a very good memory of early childhood because I think I've clung on to so many memories of my mum because of that. So I can remember stuff back to being very young, but that one I just can't place myself. I cannot place myself in my body of that moment. almost 10 years ago, I had a really terrible car accident and I had to cancel everything, basically call off life for a bit. I couldn't perform at all. I couldn't do any gigs. I couldn't do anything. And I remember talking to my GP at the time and he said, well, it sounds like you've never had a period of time where you've just achieved nothing. So why don't you just see what that feels like? And I didn't have a choice in that scenario. Right. It took me to a really dark place, like really dark, because it was so confronting to not have that coping mechanism available. But ultimately, it showed me that, like, I do still have worth. Like, I still have value, even if I can't do anything, you know? Like, and that my people, like, my family still loves me and I still love them. And, that's okay. I'm okay.
Please welcome Miss Jenny Wynter.
Okay, I'm 5 years old, right? Who's talking? 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. Okay, so, I'm 5 years old, okay? I'm 5 years, well, clearly not now. I'm 5 years old, and my mother, a single mother, has suddenly, completely out of the blue, unexpectedly, died of an aneurysm. Thank you for laughing. It was hilarious. No, it's okay. So anyway, that is a very sad, horrible story actually, but that's for another time. But what I want to share with you guys tonight is a bit about the world that from that point onwards I'm thrust into, right, which is the world of being raised by my 80-something grandmother and her quite elderly community of friends. So, you know, just like Mowgli in the Jungle Book was raised by a pack of wolves, I was raised by a pack of geriatrics.
You're listening to Help Me, I'm a Comedian with psychologist Dr Rachel Hannam from North Brisbane Psychologists. I'm your host, Ashwin Segkar, and you're also listening to comedian Jenny Wynter.
I actually I've had a lot of therapy and continue to. I think it's brilliant. I highly recommend it. But we did one exercise last year where I was actually like picturing myself as a little kid at that age and like talking to her and what I want to say. And that's full on. Like I actually have so much compassion and like heartbreak for that little kid. And and whenever I hear about another child or a child that's just lost a parent, like it just kills me. I just feel so heartbroken because that's big. That's big to lose them so young.
But it sounds like it's taught you to not look on sadness and heartbreak and grief as terrible things, but to be able to integrate them into your life.
Absolutely. And I think I am a real optimist. Like sometimes I annoy myself because I'm like, I know I'm going to find a silver lining out of this. But I think, you know, the flip side of being so hell-bent on achieving because life's short is that I value people because I know life is short, and I value my kids so much, and I'm so grateful that they're healthy and that I'm here to be there with them. And, you know, I think I never hold back from saying how much I love people, and like I apologise to fights, you know, like I think there's really good things to come from that too, of not taking people for granted.
Grief can bring you an extra level of humanity. Absolutely.
I really think that. And I also feel like because you've been through it, you aren't afraid of other people's grief, you know, like I'm not afraid to be there for somebody who's lost someone in a way that I think some people maybe can be really afraid of that. Yeah.
Can you tell us some of the things that you say to 5-year-old Jenny?
Oh, it's so sad. I'd just say you haven't done anything wrong, and this is not your fault, and things are going to get better, and that she's part of you. Whatever you believe about, whatever your religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs, it actually doesn't matter in a way, because she informed so much of who you are, even in 5 years. You know, the influence that she had is still in you and is still part of you, no matter what. That can never, ever be taken away, and that you're her legacy.
You say that she's a part of you, and sometimes when you have major milestones in your life, you remember her. Can you talk about the role she continues to play in your life?
So my mum was a singer and a songwriter. I am also a singer and a comedian. I do musical comedy and cabaret. I actually did a show a few years ago that was a one-woman show and told that story, actually, about her dying and the effect that had on my experience of parenthood. Because I think, as soon as I had kids, I just saw all of that in a different light. And I realised, oh my gosh, yes, this is devastating that my sister and I and my brother grew up without our mum, but also that she didn't get to see us growing up. It just hit me in this whole other way. So I wrote a song about it that was part of the show. And then at the end of that show, I actually found a recording that one of her friends had made of her singing this beautiful song, which is just haunting and gorgeous but devastatingly sad. And I played it on stage, and then I sang with her in that show, and we sang in harmony with each other. And then a couple of years ago, I got to take that show to New York and perform it there, and it was unbelievable. I'm getting goosebumps now.
Yeah, I'm getting goosebumps too.
Oh my God, my mum's music made it to New York 30 years later, it's unbelievable to me. And that also she never got to achieve what she wanted with music. Her music made it to just off Broadway. It's crazy to me. I actually was just thinking about her the other day because I've been having a bit of a rough trot lately, just with family. It's so crazy. Talk about manic and depressive. I feel like my life feels very much like that. Career stuff this year's been going so great. If you looked at my life on social media, you'd be like, oh my gosh, it's so great. But then on the just personal front, just lots of really hard stuff that we're going through. And I just had this moment the other day where the grief of my mum really hit me again, and it hadn't hit me like that for quite a long time. And I just realised I just really wish I had a mum at the moment. I just really wish that she was here to just, I don't even know what she'd be like as my mum right now. I can't even imagine that, but I just wish that you had a mum just to give you a hug or go to bed and I'll bring you some tea, or, there's just some times where you just want your mum.
And it just hit you again recently.
Yeah, a few days ago. And I was just I had to pull the car over and just have a huge cry. And and it's so weird because you go, I can talk about this to you guys. I'm happy to talk about it. I feel very at peace with it. I really do. And I feel like I've done so much to deal with it. Yet it can still just hit you.
Isn't that what it means to live as a vulnerable human being? Is to be able to go from being very, capable, functioning really well, then something hits you out of the blue, then you pull over on the side of the road and have a big howl and a wail.
Yeah.
Then you turn the engine on again and off you go. And, mind like water, they say in Zen Buddhism. You just...
Oh, I love that.
Mind like water. You kind of let whatever happens sort of bend you, and the flexibility, it trumps perfectionism every time, in my view.
That's beautiful.
You seem to embody that.
Oh, well, thank you. I actually did some solo improv workshops with this amazing woman many years ago, and it turned into this therapy session. It really was. And her belief is that the issues you have as a human being are the issues you're going to have on stage, which is really amazing. I think if you're scared of real connection, you won't be able to properly connect with an audience. That's a very simple example, but it's quite amazing. But so much grief for me came up in that time as well. It was really quite excruciating. And I said to her at the time, I don't understand why this is coming up. I haven't cried about this for years. I'm fine. I've dealt with this all. And she said, yeah, but grief isn't like a one-way set of stairs where you get up, you're past it, and then that's it, it's over. She's like, it's like an elevator. You might be up at this level for so long, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to, move up and down levels, and it changes. And it just really sparked something off in me, because I think I had seen it as quite linear, that, you get over something, or not even over it, it's always there, but that you're at a point where we're fine now, you can talk about it, it's all good, you know? Yeah, but it's not like that.
No. I like the elevator metaphor. I'm stealing that.
It's yours.
But thank you. But to live with that open-hearted vulnerability every day of your life and all the strength and courage that brings, but also the other emotions that it brings, to me, that's as good as it gets. That's pretty good.
Yay.
Yeah.
Good. I hope so.
How much has therapy played a part for you in being able to live in this open-hearted way, do you think?
That's a really good question. I think therapy, finding the right therapist has taken a little bit of time, and now I have, and she's just absolutely amazing and has made me also realise that I guess something that I always knew but just really articulated in a way that really helps me is that when you're having those low periods and periods where things are just so difficult, that you actually do know from past experience that that's temporary, you know, and that you can feel so stuck in that moment and so dark and bleak and like this is life right now, this is what it is. But actually that's not true. Like those times do pass and you can get up and out of them.
So, that's resilience, isn't it?
Is that one of the most important rules for mental health, is just to always maintain hope?
And yes, and the acknowledgement that you just said so well is the temporary nature of emotions.
Yeah.
You know, and different states of mind. And I think that's one of the gifts of getting older, right? Is that you can look back and go, oh, yes, I got through that other time and I got through that other time. Yes. And when I work with children, I know they don't have that experience to you can tell a 12-year-old this will pass, but they don't believe you.
It's true. And that whole, like, everything sucks.
Yeah.
Like, and I say that fully knowing that I think that when I'm in those low,
in
like,
the moment.
Everything's terrible. Everything's always terrible. Everything will always be this terrible. But yeah, the therapy thing really helped me because she sort of drew this picture of a hole and the idea that if you've fallen down a hole and you can't get up, you really have to kind of go into the fetal position and conserve energy, and all you want to do is sleep, and you just want to, do as little as possible, kind of, like depression in a way, because you're trying to conserve energy so that you can get out of the hole. So actually being less afraid of even that physical response that I have, I just wanting to crawl into bed and forget the world exists, that actually that's purposeful, that's a way that you're trying to survive it.
Okay, all right. So we're going to make up a little love song for you. I can't promise it'll be good, but it'll be inspired by Katrina and Steve. Well, I'm business analyzing, and I see her looking at me. Oh, and all I can think to myself is, Katrina, I want you to fly with me. Oh, from the moment we met in high school till the moment that presently be, I want you to come and fly with me. Oh, 10 years from now, we'll have 4 children and you'll never be in the mood. But for now, let's not think about that. I'm just gonna throw you a diamond with your airline food. Oh.
You are listening to ABC Radio and psychologist Dr Rachel Hannam with comedian Jenny Wynter talking about Jenny's experiences after the loss of her mother at age 5. Do you think that incident affected you in other ways long-term that have surprised you or that the listeners might like to hear about?
I think there was definitely a sense growing up of it just being such an injustice, like just an injustice in the world, and that seeing like all my other friends like at school, why did they get to have their parents? You know what I mean? Like, and I think that sometimes, certainly when things are really hard, even now at home, there feels like sometimes that's a real injustice. Like, and if you're having a really low, dark period, why me? But I think as I've gotten older, I've realised, well, why not me? Like, why do some people not have enough food to eat? Why do some people, and even in comedy land, that you can get so like, well, why does that person get that opportunity? And why do, but actually it's like, life's not, there's no fairness. Who judges what fair is? That's ridiculous. not saying we shouldn't try and rectify injustice in the world, but that's real injustice, not the, like, why shouldn't bad stuff happen to me? Bad stuff happens to everyone. It doesn't discriminate.
You were bullied at school.
Yes. Oh, gosh, yes. That was terrible. So, yeah, I think part of, like, after my mum died, I think part of it was just this feeling of, because I knew anyone could go at any second, I kind of didn't want to get close to anybody. So I really pushed everybody away. And also I think the fact I was such an overachiever at school, those two factors conspired to make me really unpopular. And so from about grade 4 to about grade 6, I was really excluded I was at a girls' school at that point, and girls can be so bitchy at even in that young age and bully in a really subtle way. It's not physical. It's bullying by exclusion. So, like, the popular girls were like, no one was allowed to sort of talk to me or, like, sit with me at lunch. And, yeah, it was really horrible. And that was the first time I remember writing in my diary that I wanted to die. It was just really nasty.
You are listening to ABC Radio, and psychologist Dr Rachel Hannam is here talking to comedian Jenny Wynter. And Jenny, at one point you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
So I was diagnosed with major depression actually around the time of my car accident. And to be honest, when I got a diagnosis for that, it was a real relief because it felt like it had been decades of just feeling really, just this terrible despair, but then, you know, but also being life of the party. And I know when I'd read a bit about manic depression and Stephen Fry's, you know, shared a lot of his experiences, it rang really true to me. But yeah, I think I was really afraid as well of that kind of diagnosis. But I remember once saying to my husband, now my ex-husband, at the time, I was like, yeah, look, I'm feeling really, really suicidal again, but, you know, everyone does, don't they? And he just looked at me and went, no. And I went, oh, come on. I'm like, you know, you think about killing yourself sometimes. And he was like, no, I don't. And I went, oh, okay. Like, so just something twigged that I was like, okay, this isn't normal. Medication has been like a thing that's been a bit of a process to work out what works for me. And at first, I remember when I first was on medication, you know, I still feel, even now it's scary to talk about this because I feel shame even now. I remember when I was first on medication, I told a friend of mine who is so lovely. I love her to bits. She's just gorgeous. But she said to me, oh, wow, well, okay, obviously that's just going to be a short-term thing. And I remember feeling so, like, shamed at that time of going, why should it be a short-term thing? Like, oh, gosh, okay. So then I would try to
What if it's a long-term thing? What does that mean?
Yeah, like, is that a failure? Like, does that mean there's really something wrong? And I did try to come off, like, a number of times, and it was so dreadful. And now I feel no shame about medication because I'm like, you don't understand. Like, if this is keeping me alive. This is keeping me well. You know, I've unfortunately known people who have committed suicide, and I just think people are so, like, upset and, oh, if only I could. But it's like, well, but medication is part of that equation. So don't shame people for that being a choice when, you know, the alternative is so horrific, for goodness sake. So
Yeah.
I'm perfectly fine with being on it for the rest of my life.
Yes.
It's more the talking about bipolar. I still feel stigma.
If you were to offer some advice to someone who's living with a person who's been diagnosed with bipolar, can you give us some suggestions of how they should be?
I think when your partner's not in a bad space, like when you're in a pretty calm space, that's a really good time to talk about it. Because in that situation, logic can be your friend. Whereas when someone's in the middle of that kind of experience, logic isn't really helpful because the self-talk and the negative stuff is, you know, louder, I guess. So asking them what kind of things are helpful for me to say to you when you're in that space and what's not helpful. Because I know for myself, if he says to me something like, you know, oh, it's okay, like, don't worry, remember, you know, it's all going to be all right, actually doesn't mean anything to me. Whereas if he says it's okay, like, I'll just hold you, I'm just here, it's okay. Just remember, you've been here before and you'll be here again. But that's okay too. It's honestly, that helps me. That may not help everybody, but I think it's just having really clear communication with each other about what's going to be helpful.
Jenny, your sister was 2 years old when your mother passed away. What role has she played in all of the stories and events you've been talking about?
Oh, my beautiful sister. Well, I think, so she has no memory at all of our mum. She was only like 2.5. But I think as a result, I completely took on that mother role. Our grandmother raised us, so we did call her mum. So she was like our mum. But I was incredibly maternal towards Ange, and I still am. Still very, very protective. And I think this is very telling. I always call my daughter Angie, and I call Angie my daughter's name. So I always mix them up, Ella and Angie. It's just so funny, isn't it? That they both play that daughter role to me. But Ange is also a singer, and we've done musical stuff together. I think we are ridiculously close, and I think I could fairly say closer than any sisters that I've met. Not to brag or anything, there's that achievement thing coming in again. But I think because we've gone through so much together, and growing up with such a unique sort of family history, we just have such an incredible bond. And again, I think that's something really beautiful that's come out of something very traumatic. Yeah, but I've had to learn that I'm not her mother.
She probably appreciates that.
I have to let go. But I do feel very, protective, and almost like if something's wrong, I want to fix it, So I've had to try and let go of that a little bit.
But you're right, it is something beautiful to have come out of tragedy.
Yeah.
Which is so often the case with tragedy.
I've always thought that too, that, tragedies... It's such a cliche, isn't it? But it does bring people together. That's what happens. That's the good side of any horrific thing. And I think you can take comfort in that when horrendous things happen all the time in the world. But you will also see people being really good to each other in those times.
You've been listening to Help Me, I'm a Comedian with comedian Jenny Wynter and psychologist Dr Rachel Hannam from North Brisbane Psychologists. I'm your host, Ashwin Segkar.